Hey there, this is Phil Liu from XPOsoft, and this is our XPO Talk 7-part series that addresses Agile and the key solutions to the most common software development pain points related to software QA. By the end of this 7-part series, you'll understand requirements, Agile sizing, testing using manual versus automation, test asset management, highlighting the use of one of the most common Jira plugins, automation script writing, highlighting a tool that we use, the use of quality gates, and how to determine them, as well as KPIs and when and where to use those. In this session, we're going to focus on Agile sizing. So let's first talk about the challenges of sizing Agile Epics, stories, tasks, and a term called spikes. We'll start the discussion by defining the Agile components and then discuss the different sizing processes used and the thought process behind these philosophies. We'll build upon these concepts we learned in the requirements discussion in part 1 and talk about how quality is incorporated into the Agile object. Any discussion on Agile needs to start with understanding and respecting our fellow team members and a willingness to actively communicate information amongst the team. And when we talk about communication amongst the team, that's where the Agile sizing comes in. When discussing Agile sizing techniques, understanding how the project is time segmented is helpful. Generally, teams use the term iteration and sprint interchangeably. The Agile team sets the length of time allowed for each iteration. The most common length of iteration chosen is 1 to 3 weeks. In rare cases, when a team is first changing from waterfall to Agile, they may try 4-week iterations. Backlog is the list of things which need to be completed on the product. The list is used to pull epics and stories into the project iterations when the timing makes sense. Generally, the backlog is made up of epics and stories. Epics are really direction setting in software development. They generally encompass a feature delivery. The work encompassed in an epic may not be complete within a single iteration. An epic may contain 1 or more stories. All stories associated with the epic must have been marked complete to close the epic. Going back to our XPO talk session on requirements where we use the analogy of building a house, an epic would be defined as, for example, the roof, the external design of the house, the first floor plan, the second floor plan, etc. So now you get an idea of the scale of an epic. Stories, on the other hand, are limited to a narrowly defined scope of work which can be completed within a single iteration. All tasks associated with the story must be marked complete to close that story. Continuing with the house analogy, a story may be defined as installing a front door, installing windows in the living room, or the center stairs. A story is a chunk of work which can be completed and tested within a single iteration. Tasks are defined within each story. A story can have 1 or more tasks, and tasks, of course, can also have subtasks. Tasks are defined as work within the story and may be assigned to multiple team members. From a story delivery perspective, a story may have a business analyst task, a system analyst task, a development task, and a QA task. Continuing with the house analogy, defined as installing the front door, tasks may include purchasing the door, taking delivery of the door, installing the door, painting the door, installing the doorknob, installing the lock, installing the ring doorbell associated with that front door. And of course, testing would make sure that the front door opens, closes, and locks without an issue. A spike is a research area, usually around a new feature, a new technology, or a process. Depending on how broad the subject area is, it could be classified as either an epic or a story. Part of the determination of how to classify the spike is whether it can be completed in a single iteration and the estimated effort. The spike is purposely vague in order to allow the exploratory nature and may carry over between iterations without penalty. For the purpose of our discussion, we are going to assume the Agile team is working on a 2-week sprint. For each sprint, the Agile team needs to review availability due to holidays, vacations, training, and use the actual available hours to determine how many stories they can take on for that iteration. A general rule of thumb is that if a person is scheduled to work an 8-hour day, they will have 6 hours of availability. It is important to include quality checks from the inception of the story. All team members have a responsibility when a story is accepted into an iteration to contribute, ensuring the requirement specifications are clear and complete, ensuring that it can be built to meet the requirement, ensuring it can be tested, and working to understand how it fits into the parent epic. quality and the testability of the story should be considered at story conception and reevaluated when the story is accepted into an iteration and verified prior to the story being closed. On many Agile teams, team members are encouraged to explore skills beyond their initial skill set. For example, a quality engineer may take on business, system, or development tasks. A business analyst may take on system or quality tasks, and a system analyst may take on business development or quality tasks as well. The question becomes how to size chunks of work to determine how to classify them, and that's where we get to estimation. One common method is the t-shirt sizing method, where you take chunks of work and size them according to t-shirt sizes like extra large, large, medium, and small. The t-shirt concept is that the format of the story will stay the same and the amount of information covered increases with size. Similar to folded clothing, the iteration length is fixed, or like the size of the dresser is a fixed volume. Therefore, if you have extra large objects or extra large t-shirts, they take up more space than small t-shirts, and therefore you can only fit so many extra large objects into a sprint or the drawer. An extra large story has the potential to be too large to be completed in one iteration. In this case, the team will potentially want to look out how this can be broken up into multiple stories. An extra large story may estimate to be 50 to 100% of the iteration capacity. Large stories, on the other hand, may be able to be completed in one iteration, but if it takes tasks which must be completed in a specific order due to dependencies, the team may decide that the story needs to be split into multiple stories to be able to fulfill the story being complete in one iteration. A large story may estimate to take up 40 to 75% of the iteration capacity. A medium story should be able to be completed in one iteration. The order of the tasks within the story and when the story can be started in the iteration needs to be taken into consideration to determine if the story can be completed within the iteration. If the team wants to start a medium story and does not feel that they can start the work early enough in the sprint to complete the story, then they should break it into two stories. A medium story may estimate about 10 to 50% of the capacity of an iteration. Small stories, on the other hand, should be able to complete it in one iteration and may only take up, say, between 0 and 20% of the capacity of an iteration. There are other methods for sizing stories, such as point sizing methods, where the team comes to a common understanding of what a point signifies and then assigns points to chunks of works. Points can be attributed to effort. For example, 1 point equals 8 hours of duration to complete a task. Or a point could also comprise of elapsed time, 1 day of work. When we mentioned earlier about communication being one of the key aspects of Agile, the Agile team needs to come to a common understanding and apply their measurement techniques consistently. It may take a new team 2 to 3 iterations to understand their cadence and take on the correct number of stories to be able to complete within an iteration. The goal is to not have any stories selected for an iteration that carry over into the next iteration, therefore resulting in what's called work in progress. Many common agreements state that credit for work on stories in an iteration occurs when the story is closed. If the story has outstanding tasks, it is completed or carried over to the next iteration. One of the key benefits of an Agile team is learning from previous iterations and previous work. So if you don't close out a task, then that usually does not get included in the retrospective in discussing the learnings from completing that task. So it's very important that the team needs to understand its capacity to complete work. If it overestimates capacity, then the team may experience overtime to complete the iteration, or the story may carry over into the next iterations. Many Agile teams track their story attempt and completion during their retrospective ceremonies on stories which were attempted but not completed with next steps. Okay, so let's summarize some of the key learnings from today's session on Agile sizing. Firstly, there is a one-to-many relationship between epic stories and tasks. Stories and tasks should be actionable work which can be completed within an iteration or sprint. The Agile team needs to decide how they're going to chunk the work in a project and apply a standard measurement process, whether it be t-shirts or points or duration or effort. Spikes are exploratory in nature and can be an epic or a story, Results will be reflected in future actionable work. Epics and stories will contain quality tasks. Quality should be built in from the beginning, and quality tasks can include many things, not just testing, but could be testing of actual requirements, ensuring that requirements are clear and complete, for example, and understandable. Iteration completion statistics are usually tracked in order to have input into the retrospective at the end of each iteration. Understanding team capacity is important to taking on the amount of work which can be reasonably completed within an iteration, and avoiding stary carryover or overtime to complete the work is critical. Accurate story sizing and estimates are important then, right? Because without accurate story sizing, then the team will be unable to sustain a cadence for each iteration and help the team to avoid overtime. In closing, thank you for taking the time to learn more about Agile sizing. In the next XPO Talk episode, we will explore manual versus automation testing and what makes a good candidate for test automation.